What's going on? My name is Simoni. Today I'm going to teach you how to make an authentic traditional Sicilian pizza. You can basically put anything on a pizza, but this time I chose to put tomatoes, peppers on one side and anchovies on the other side. We start, you can either use completely all-purpose flour, or you can also do half and half of whole wheat and all-purpose flour if you're trying to have a healthy lifestyle. I wouldn't use more than half whole wheat because then the dough comes out kind of strange. So Italians don't measure things, so this is all going to be by eye. We start by putting some flour of the all-purpose, and this is something that takes practice to get a hold of like how much you're going to use. But this looks about, to me, like about half of the flour I want to use. So maybe I'll use a little less than half for the whole wheat. But so I'm adding whole wheat, and this is probably about the amount of flour that you want to have total. Now the next step is the yeast. So you're going to take a packet of yeast. I really don't know how much is necessary, but a packet of yeast does the job. So we're going to put it in some hot, lukewarm water, mix it in the water to make sure it's dissolved. And after it's dissolved, you're going to pour it into the flour, and then you work it with your hands, the flour and the yeast water mixture, and you just like kind of roll it like this. And then you have to like pound it in so that when you're kneading it, so that you see what texture it's at with this amount of water. So this, of course, is too dry. This was like one glass of water. So we're going to just add a little bit of extra water. You have to bear with it. So you just knead it, you keep on kneading it. And you try to, you take the dough where it's wetter, and you take it to where the flour, the dry flour is, to try to soak it up. And you notice also that I'm folding the dough at this point because it's getting closer to the correct consistency. So folding it and then kneading it. And then I'm going to add a tiny bit more water because this is not ready yet. It should be a little bit kind of shiny with the water, just like a little bit down. So we're going to add just like a tiny bit of water. Italian cooking is all about judgment. So if you add too much water, you add more flour, and vice versa. And this is almost ready. It's like a little bit shiny, but it's still not damp enough. So we're going to add just a tiny bit more water. And there's kind of a sound the dough makes when it's the right consistency. So at this point it's at the right consistency, so we form it into a ball. And then we press it a tiny bit, and the next step is very important. Now is the rising step, and you don't want the bread to dry, because if you let it out for a while, the top of the bread is going to start making a crust, and you don't want that. So you add like a tiny bit, just a few drops of olive oil, and you basically just spread the olive oil everywhere to make sure that it covers every spot of the top of the dough. So this is another judgment, like you have to figure out how much oil you need to cover. You just want a slight amount of dough. You don't want to make it oily, because authentic Italian pizza is not oily. But you want to make sure that you just cover everything with a thin layer of olive oil. And this olive oil that I'm using is extra virgin olive oil, which is the only good olive oil to use in cooking in general, for Italian cooking. And then at this point we're going to cover the at this point you want the dough to rise. So you want to keep in the most humidity you can. So you put the top on. You put the top on, but you don't want to cover everything, because you want the yeast to breathe. So you have it almost completely covered, and then you take something like a cloth and you put it over the part where it's open. So we're just putting that so it can breathe. And then you're just going to leave this for about 30-40 minutes to rise, and then I'll take you to the next step of what we do afterwards. Using peppers for part of the pizza. Today I'll be using these Italian frying peppers. You can find them at a lot of different places, including Seatown. These are Italian frying peppers. They're also called cubanelle or cubanelle. In combination with that, these are not necessary. These are just some homegrown bell peppers that I'm going to be using in combination. And I'll also be using these type of Italian roaster peppers, which are kind of spicy, so they add some flavor and add some heat to the meal. And if you want to count it, I'm also using a dried hot pepper just to add a little bit of extra spice. And these tomatoes are the tomatoes that I always use for pizzas. These are paste tomatoes or Roma tomatoes, and they're really good for pizza or pasta or anything, because they're kind of dry and they have a lot of flavor. And so those are the vegetables I'll be using on that part of the pizza. It's been 40 minutes, so you see that it's rised to maybe about double the size that it was before. Pound it down. So you want to fill the pan and just basically get all of the air out of the dough. And then we just cover it again with the cap and leave a little bit open and cover it with something to let it breathe. I've cut up the tomatoes and the peppers here, and also some onion. And soon we're gonna cook this up, because you want to cook it before you use it as a topping. So now we're gonna cook the peppers and tomatoes before we put it as a topping, so that all the flavors combine. So the first thing you always do in almost all the Italian cooking for toppings, you do like a sofrito. You basically fry some onion or garlic. In this case, I'm going to use onion. So you put a little bit of oil. You put it at about medium temperature, and you throw in the onion. So at this point, the onions have been frying for a tiny bit, for a few minutes. They're starting to turn just slightly brown. And this is the step where you add the peppers and the onions. So we're just going to pour everything in there. Now especially the tomatoes are going to make good juice when you start cooking them. So we're basically just going to cook it to a certain point until the juice is evaporated, so that it won't be too soggy on the pizza. So we're just going to add a few herbs to this. I'm going to be adding a little bit of basil, oregano, oregano is one of the most important herbs for the pizza, so it's used more than the other ones. And I'm going to be using rosemary. Now there's like different variations, so you can use different spices, but these are kind of the standard. And just like a tiny bit of salt. I hardly use salt. And then we're just going to mix it. And then we're going to cook it for a while. The tomatoes are going to be making a little bit of juice, so we're going to be cooking it until the whole thing is pretty much dry. A tiny bit of liquid, but for the most part, most of the liquid is evaporated out, and it's cooked. So this we can now take off of the stove, and on to the next step, which is making the sauce.